when I think of fishing, I think it's like a very active kind of thing. Like you're kind of, I see it's like perpetual motion. You're doing it's all that. But one thing that surprised me is it's a lot of sitting around. So it's a lot of it's actually mostly sitting around waiting, and it's not action packed. But everybody on the boat is ready to spring to action the moment a fish is caught. There can be lots of things happening. We were playing cards, we were having conversation, but there's kind of this understanding among everybody on the boat. The second somebody yells fish on, we're all dropping what we do, and we're going to help with the fish. And that was a really cool picture to me, just of, there was this one moment where we're all hanging out. One of the deckhands he was scrubbing something on the deck, and somebody yelled fish on, and he dropped the brush, and he had this huge hose that was pulling in water from the ocean, hosing off the deck, and he just dropped everything and ran. And the thing that it made me think of is everybody on the boat knows the most important thing is catching fish. Whatever they're doing, they want to catch fish. And hi, Evie. And it made me think, it's really having that attitude that Jesus said, I will make you fishers of men. The first thing that struck me is, even though we may be doing all sorts of things, do we have the attitude that we want to be catching fish? And even though we may be waiting for a long time, it doesn't need to mean that we have to be in this active posture all the time, but do we have the sense that that's the most important thing? And if we ever hear fish on, so to speak, we drop everything because whatever we're doing, whether we're playing cards or having a conversation, whatever, the most important thing is see other people coming to a saving knowledge of Jesus. And the next thing that struck me is it's a team effort that, I have in my mind. I kind of have the picture of a river runs through it. One guy in this huge, vast scene, very pastoral image. But what I saw on this boat is that it's a team effort. Everybody is involved. And it reminded me of in 1 Corinthians where Paul says, one plants and one waters, but God is the one who causes the growth. And it made me think whenever, anytime, there are probably 20 poles kind of with bait in the ocean, but and there's a person for each of those poles. So it's 20 fishermen on the boat. But the second somebody yells fish on, everybody just runs to that guy and helps him. We all leave our lines alone and we all go help. And some guy, it means, if you got to cut your own line and you got to move your pole, you got to do whatever. It's like when there's a fish on, that's what's important to everybody else. And it made me think that what the boat is after is catching fish, not I'm after me catching fish. It's my goal is for anybody on the boat to catch fish. And it just made me think of the attitude we should, if I think about the boat as the church in a sense, that we should all care as much about the people in each other's lives as we do the people in our own lives. And when I'm just thinking, for example, if Thomas brings his family, my hope is that to our church, that I would have such an eagerness and such a care, so much of a care, as much of a care as you have for them, that I'd be willing to drop whatever I'm doing and engage because we're in the boat together, so to speak, and we have that sense of a common purpose. That's anyone catching a fish is greater than any of our individual efforts, so to speak. Another thing that really struck me is there is a lot of downtime. There were hours when basically nothing happened. And I was thinking about it. But that doesn't mean that nothing was happening. Actually, a lot was going on because the captain had arranged the poles on the boat so that he said, so there's poles kind of all around. It's a huge boat, and all around the boat there's all these poles, and they're at the kind of bait are dropped to various depths. And what the captain said he was trying to do is he wants our bait to collectively look like a school of fish. And kind of underwater, he's trying to make a school of fish with varying depths and fish kind of everywhere. And so that's one thing. And the second thing is he's constantly looking at a kind of a fish finder, looking for schools of salmon to kind of swim our bait through. And so we're acting so even though we're just sitting on the deck, not really doing much sometimes, it doesn't mean nothing is happening. And it just made me think about our lives that, I think that it's easy to think of, evangelism as an active thing, but just going about our daily lives, we ought to have the attitude that, we have bait in the water, and we can be going about all sorts of things, but we still have this intentionality. And one of the things that struck me is that the captain, like, there are 20 fishermen on the boat, but the captain was the real fisherman. I don't know if you get that, but like, whether a fish bites my pole or not it has very little to do with me, but it has a lot to do with the captain putting the right bait on and driving and like putting it at the right depth. And it gave me a picture of God as the captain of our boat or of our ship. And if we think about all of our lives as kind of bait in the water, it's God who sets the depths and who drives our boat through our lives and kind of is seeking to catch fish in all of our lives. It gave me this picture of God as the one who's in control. I mean, as the individual fisherman, I had no say over where the boat was going to go. None whatsoever. I just sat there. And even if I caught a fish, very little of the credit belongs to me. It's the captain did a really good job. But everybody comes together. And then the second thing it made me think is fish in the ocean, the fish we're trying to catch, the reason the captain made it look like a school of fish underwater is because fish that we're trying to catch are attracted to schools, not individual bait. And it made me think that the people that there ought to be something about our church that brings to our lives individually something that's more attractive than if we were just swimming on our own. That there's something about the school of fish that draws hungry people to know the Lord. That's different than individual bait. It's not like, we have one piece of bait kind of floating in the ocean. There's 20 pieces of bait, and that is what draws fish. And if a fish bites, and kind of made me think too, at one point I was with a friend and he said, it's kind of random whether you get a fish or I get a fish. And I said, but I say, who's not getting a fish? I joke because Michelle's, I said, Michelle's not catching a fish. You know why? She's not out here. And so it is random, like who's going to catch fish, but you have to be out here to catch one. And it made me think that, when anybody caught if a salmon bit my lure, it says something more about the school than it does about my bait in a way. My bait is just one of a school of bait, and it's a comment on how attractive the captain has made the school, not my little one bait. Another thing that I thought was cool was that anytime somebody catches a fish, the entire boat celebrates. So it's like everything stops on the boat and everyone's cheering and they're high-fiving, and it's again this idea that we all know that we're there for this one purpose. And like if Bobby catches a fish, I'm not like, no one is sitting in the corner sulking like, I wish I got the fish. People are excited for Bobby and we're having fun, and that's the point. And we're fishing and we all have that attitude, and it made it really fun. And then one thing that I found really interesting was even when there's no activity going on, the thing that we always had to do is what we call check bait. And what that means is every 20 or 30 minutes, you literally set a timer on your phone. Every 20 or 30 minutes, every single fisherman was supposed to reel up their bait and then look to see, very rarely does the bait come off. So you're not checking to see whether you still have bait. You're looking to see, we were using minnows, do they still shimmer? Are the scales still on it? Is it attractive enough to catch a fish? Would a fish want to eat it, or does it look dead? And because it is dead, right? But you kill them and then you put them in the water, and for a while they look alive. But the thing it made me think of for us is, do we regularly check our bait, so to speak? Do we have a regular practice of examining our own lives and saying, is the thing that is on display in my life attractive enough to catch a fish? Would somebody see it and say, oh, I gotta have that? And I really appreciated this. I mean, every 20 minutes for 8 hours, we're reeling, and they're like 60 feet down. It's not easy to reel it, but every 20 minutes you're reeling it up, and it's no big deal. Throw away the bait and get a new bait. But the point is, make sure that what you have in the water is attractive to the fish that you're trying to catch, because there's no point in having bait in the water if it's not attractive. And it just made me think a lot about, for me in my workplace, is the joy that I exude. Am I always rejoicing? Or when there are inevitably frustrations, do I succumb to the frustration just like everybody else? In that sense, the bait that the fisherman has put in the water isn't attractive, and nobody sees something there that they want. Or is Do I have an aroma, the aroma of Christ about me such that it's attractive? But it's a practice to regularly be checking, that I'm regularly checking whether my bait is still good or whether I need fresh bait. And I took a lot from that. And then the last thing I noticed was we all had one thing in common, everybody on the boat. We all had to make a sacrifice to be there. I personally woke up at 3:30 that morning, because we had to leave Sausalito at 5 a.m. So I'm not complaining. It was fine. But we all made sacrifices, and everybody on the boat, in the middle of the day, to enjoy being able to make a catch, what I knew about what was true about everybody is we all woke up at way before sunrise. And the captain decided when we leave. None of us got to say, hey, you know what? I'd kind of like to wake up at 9. Could we leave at like 10? If you want to catch fish, it's like we can go on a boat cruise and that'd be really fun and we can leave whenever you guys want. If you want to catch fish, you got to get up before sunrise. It requires making a sacrifice. I don't know about you, it's not easy for me to wake up that early. It was tough. But I say that it does feel like a sacrifice a little bit, but just a little, because we're going fishing. And there's something about the adrenaline of the pursuit and the purpose that makes a sacrifice not even feel that hard. And I was reflecting on that. I'd never wake up that early, ever, for any reason, other than a screaming infant, which is regular right now. But otherwise, never wake up that early. But it felt like a little bit of a sacrifice, but not a lot. And I was thinking about why not, and it's the thrill of the hunt. Everybody thought, we're going to catch fish, it's going to be amazing. And it just made me think about approaching the sacrifices that we all have to make in our own lives with a similar kind of mentality, that the purpose, that the good news of Jesus Christ being manifested in our lives is so much better than any sacrifice we have to make. And it's worth the sacrifice. And if we don't see the reward as so much greater than the sacrifice, we begrudge the sacrifice. We become unwilling to make it. And it just made me think that we need to have a really high view of the reward. That what we have in Jesus is so good, and what others can have in him is so good, that it's worth whatever sacrifice it takes. So a few fun reflections from my day of fishing. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. Yeah, it was good to hear what Jeremy shared just now, that we should be always aware of why we are here for and what is the main purpose. Because it's often so easy for us to lose sight and get caught up. I mean, we do get caught up in everyday affairs, and then every now and then we need to get a jolt to be reminded where we are. And so that analogy which he shared was very good. The other day I came across this verse when I was reading 1 Samuel. This is 1 Samuel chapter 14. There is an incident where the Israel is at war with Philistines, and Saul is the king, and it's a kind of a time of difficulty for Israel because they are at a kind of weaker end. And then there comes a victory for Israel because of Saul's son Jonathan does something brave, and then they get victorious. And then, he does something that his father said should not be done. And so here is an incident where he is on trial, and in verse 44, 1 Samuel 14:44, Saul said, "May God do this to me and more also, for you shall surely die, Jonathan." So the father is speaking to the son. But the people said to Saul, "Must Jonathan die, who has brought about this great deliverance in Israel? Far from it. As the Lord lives, there shall not one hair of his head shall fall to the ground. For he has worked with God this day." So the people rescued Jonathan, and he did not die. Saul had decided that, I'm sure he loved Jonathan, but because of the context is that Saul was in a difficult war, and And victory when the victory started coming, when he saw that he is now winning against the Philistines, then in verse 24 of the same chapter he made a very rash statement. He said in verse 24, "Now the men of Israel were hard pressed on that day, for Saul had put the people under oath, saying, 'Cursed be the man who eats food before evening, and until I have avenged myself on my enemies.' So none of the people tasted food." I mean, this is a war, and the first thing that you need is that you must be fit, and you must be strong to fight. And then he says nobody should eat until I win the war. And then they enter into a forest. There's a lot of honey, and people are so hard pressed. And then, in verse 27, Jonathan, he had not heard about this condition, that the order that his father had given. So he put the end of his staff in verse 27 and tasted the honey, and his eyes were brightened. Then his servant told Jonathan, "Your father strictly put the people under oath, saying, 'Cursed be the man who eats food today.' And the people were weary." Jonathan said, "My father has troubled the land. See now how my eyes are brightened, because I tasted a little bit of honey." The point is that, Saul had a zeal that was, he wanted to accomplish something, and he didn't think about anything else. He said, "Oh, I must win the war." And how did he really come to this victorious position? Is because of Jonathan. And earlier in the same chapter, in verse 6, Jonathan, in chapter 14, verse 6, Jonathan said to the young man who was carrying his armor, "Come, let us cross over to the garrison of the uncircumcised Philistines. Perhaps the Lord will work for us, for the Lord is not restrained to save by many or by a few." Now he went in the power of God. Trusting in the Lord, because he and his armor bearer, just the two of them, he said, "Okay, let us go into the enemy's camp." And then he makes a statement, verse 8. Jonathan said, "Behold, we will cross over to the men and reveal ourselves to them. If they say to us, 'Wait until we come to you,' then we will stand in our place and not go up to them. But if they say, 'Come up to us,' then we will go up, for the Lord has given them into our hands, and this shall be the sign to us." He put a test to the Lord and said, "Lord, if you want us to go, then make this happen. And otherwise, we will assume that, okay, you don't want us to go this direction, we'll go back." His strength was that the Lord is not restrained. I don't have to have an army. It's just me and my servant is enough. That was his position. And the story goes, he goes and then was told that those people called him and they said, "Come up to us." Then he knew that the Lord had given them into his hands, and he goes and conquers them, he and his servant, and they started the victory. And that's the victory finally, ultimately Saul got. But Saul, he didn't have any understanding or any smell of the role that Jonathan played with God that day. And that's why people said, "Jonathan has worked with God today, and he shall not die, even if you, Saul, thinks that your order is great and you are the king." Saul had that, very fleshly, I would say soulish attitude to things. Because he was not a man who was in tune with God. He always wanted to accomplish things, and all he thought about is, what should I do? And he never had a heart that says, check with the Lord. There was no such thing in Saul's life. It was always, okay, what do you people want? If you look at Saul's life, that's basically what he went by. He gave face to what people expected of him, and not what the Lord expected of him. And that's why he lost the kingdom finally. But then when Jonathan went in the strength of the Lord, and then the people had the discernment to say, this man worked with God. That is something, that phrase, working with God, that is what he did, is that he asked the Lord for help and sign, and he went ahead and he conquered. And that they called it as working with God. And I thought that is something some I was encouraged by that phrase, working with God, because that is precisely what we need to do. I mean, in the beginning, I mean, when Bobby opened the meeting, I mean, he talked about listening to God and receiving that word every day. I mean, in a very simple, plain statement, I would say that is what I understand by working with God. I mean, basically to know, Lord, what do you want me to do? You know, what is it that you want me to do in this particular situation? Because I would have done this way based on the experience I had maybe a week ago, but maybe today is different. And I want to know your direction and your will. And so Saul was not like that. Saul knew if he has enough people, he can go and conquer. And all that he lacked at that time was the number of people and the armor. He didn't have, because they were somehow very much deprived of all that by the Philistines. But then God delivered the whole thing by the whole army. God delivered them from this big army of Philistines by just two people, basically one person, Jonathan. And then Saul thought, yeah, now it's my turn, and so nobody shall eat. I mean, it is so possible sometimes to, sometimes to forget, I mean, where we are and what are we there for, and to think that, yeah, we are so goal driven and we need to be doing this. We have our programs and we need to evangelize, or, I mean, what Jeremy said, that's a very, very nice, lesson, I mean, from his fishing. And, then we know that sometimes that people even take such a thing and make it into, evangelism has become sometimes burden. We think that we have to evangelize every day. But he was saying that the captain puts it and the captain drives, and we just have to go with it. And that's what takes the strain out of it. And we need to make sure the bait is always attractive. But and I believe that is what it means to work with the captain, and not I work for myself. And that is something that I learned from here, that not to be like Saul. If I say like that, not to be like Saul. A person who is driven by his own ambitions and goals, and finally he lost the kingdom. And in Saul's life, he started. There is a sad verse that Samuel tells Saul in 1 Samuel 15, verse 17, verse 16. 1 Samuel 15, 16, 17. It says, "Wait, and let me tell you what the Lord said to me last night." Saul said, "Speak." Samuel said, "Is it not true that though you were little in your own eyes, you were made the head of the tribes of Israel, and the Lord anointed you king over Israel? And the Lord sent you on a mission, go and utterly strike the Amalekites and fight against them until they are exterminated. Why then did you not obey the voice of the Lord, but rushed upon the spoil and did what was evil in the sight of the Lord?" Now he's asking a very point-blank question. And then Saul answers Samuel in verse 20, "I did obey the voice of the Lord." That's his thinking, that he obeyed. He has gone so far from the Lord's heart. He says, "No, I did obey, I obeyed, and went on the mission on which the Lord sent me, and have brought back the king, and have utterly destroyed the Amalekites. But," verse 21, "the people took some of the spoil, and sheep and oxen and choicest things, because we want to sacrifice to the Lord." Yeah, I read that one verse. You can actually, if you read this life of Saul, at every point in time, every failure, he had one thing to blame, or he had one thing as a reason: the people. The people told him this, or the people told him not to do that, and he chose to do that. And so he had an ear for the people, because he wanted the acceptance and made sure that his kingdom, he thought that his kingdom will be safe if people are with him. And so he was willing to disobey, the command. That's why Saul said, you were not even seen when I chose you, when I announced you as a king. If you read back in 1 Samuel 9, when he was publicly announced as king, he was not even there, because he thought he was too small. He should not be the king. But he was indeed big, even in size, above everybody else. But so he was hiding behind the baggages. He didn't have the kind of the strength, boldness to come forward, and they had to go and pick him up. That's what Samuel says, "You were so little in your own eyes, but now why have you become so big?" And it is so possible that, we can also start little and start small and start humble, And finally, we can be in a position where we are not even able to acknowledge that we have sinned against the Lord. That's all Saul said. I know, I obeyed. And just to go on to this, when Samuel said many things, you can read from there, but finally Saul had no option, but says, I have indeed transgressed the command. Verse 24. And verse 25, please pardon and return with me that I may worship. And Samuel said, no, I will not come. Then verse 30, Saul says, I have sinned. Please honor me before the elders of my people and Israel. Go back with me that I may worship the Lord your God. Yeah, that's all he was concerned. Please honor me. My honor is at stake. It is true. Isn't it true that, even though we have understood so much about what it means to follow the Lord, it is true that we are all concerned about our honor. It is true that we are all concerned about our testimony and so many things. And it can become such a, like Saul in this case, he was publicly kind of, confessing that he is such a kind of completely gone case, meaning completely gone away. That's why he is even putting in his own words to the prophet, saying, I have sinned, but please come. What is important to me is now honor. He's just saying it straight. No hiding anything. And that is because he never worked with God. And if he can be like Jonathan, who can be simple enough to trust the Lord, or like David, who can be simple enough to trust the Lord to go against the Philistine giant when all his brothers and everybody, even including Saul, said, oh, you cannot. But all he said was that, yeah, I can, because he had a resume to show. I read it today, this morning, when I was thinking about it. I call it a resume because when Saul came to, when David came to fight Goliath, then there was this place when Saul calls him, because he was saying, okay, what shall be done for the man who defeats a giant? Then, because of him, he was brought to Saul the king. And then Saul told him in 1 Samuel 17, verse 33, he said, you are not able to, 1 Samuel 17:33, you are not able to go against this Philistine to fight with him because you are a youth. But he has been a warrior from his youth. And 34, he says, David said, your servant was tending his father's sheep. This is what I call his resume. When a lion or a bear came and took a lamb from the flock, I went out after him and attacked him and rescued it from his mouth. When he rose up against me, I seized him by the beard and struck him and killed him. And verse 37, the Lord who delivered me from the paw of the lion and from the paw of the bear, he will also deliver me from the hand of this Philistine. So that was his confidence, and Saul didn't have it. Saul was much stronger, much trained, and everything far outweighing David. But David had this one thing: the Lord who delivered me from the lion will also deliver me from this Philistine, because he is out against the living God. That is our strength. As long as our heart, is concerned about, just now Jeremy said about the bait being attractive enough. I would put it here. If the bait is our life, and if the life is attractive enough, and then when we examine it every so often, we should examine and make sure that it is attractive, and then God will show us things, and then that is how that's how I interpret what David said. The Lord who delivered me will also deliver me. But that faith, that boldness will sustain in a living way only if I am working and walking with God. Otherwise, it can be an empty testimony, a testimony that does not have the power behind it. And I pray that we will make an effort to really listen to God and to know, Lord, what do you want me to do in this situation, in that situation? And what is that you are speaking to me? Then we can walk with God and we can work with God. And then when a big situation comes, we will have a resume to show. I mean, in humility and with confidence, we will have a resume that says that the Lord who delivered me from that, He will also deliver me from this, in a way that glorifies Him, not in a way that I come up all in flying colors. No, it's my color is not the main thing. My victory is not getting what I'm looking for, or getting a job that I'm looking for, or getting some problems, or that is not the main thing. The main thing is for the Lord to come through and show me His face and guide me. And that is what I understand as working and walking with God. And we can, if we make use of every situation and then and use the situation to reach out to God. And God, as we heard right in the beginning, is always speaking. He is always wanting to speak, if only we have ears to hear. Amen.
Good morning, church family. I thank God for all the messages I hear from this pulpit, because all the messages nourish me, encourage me, lift me up. Jesus said that I will make you fishers of men. So we heard about fishing, salmon. I like to eat salmon, but I don't know fishing. I would like to learn that too. Okay, so we were hearing that we have to hear from God every day. We have to work for God every day. We have to put God in our boat. We have to put Jesus Christ in our boat for successfully fishing. One time I read in a book about a servant of God. He said in his book that I have eaten maybe thousands of meals in my life, but I don't remember the recipe. But one thing I know, it nourished me. It nourished me, and it was helpful for my healthy life. In the same way, we may hear many messages. Maybe we don't remember all of them, but from here and there, a bit from here, a bit from there, we will remember, and that will keep our life going, our spiritual life going, and that will help us. So that we may not be able to remember everything. For example, last Sunday, we heard from Brother Saik. The one thing which keeps in mind and I remember is grow in the grace of God and in the knowledge of Jesus Christ. That I remember. The other thing, I have the note with me. I can go through that, but I don't remember. I remember this thing, that the knowing, growing in the grace and the knowledge of Jesus Christ. And one thing that struck me is that knowledge of the Bible and knowledge of Jesus Christ, there is a world of difference in that. Because the Pharisees, they knew the Bible, but they did not know Jesus Christ, who was standing in their midst. They did not know about Him, but they had a Bible knowledge. In the same way, not only the knowledge of Bible will help us in our spiritual life, we should have the knowledge of Jesus Christ also. Both should keep in line, knowledge of the Bible and knowledge of Jesus Christ. Another thing I learned after coming this New Covenant Christian Fellowship is that the local church is the body of Jesus Christ, and that gave me a great insight into my life, into my Christian life, into my spiritual life, that local church is the body of Christ. That we read in Revelation 2 and 3, there separate churches, separate local churches, and I was sitting in the denomination for many years, and then I came to this church. Denominational pattern is the Old Testament pattern. Local church run by the elders, that is the New Testament pattern. I thank God for having this knowledge in my heart, knowing about the New Testament pattern and the New Testament church. So we have to build the New Testament church. The local church is the New Testament church. And I got this conviction that I am also part of that New Testament church, and I have the responsibility to build the local church. When I was in the denomination, my thinking was that it is the duty of the priest or the pastor or who is running the church. But now I got this revelation that it is my responsibility to build the local church, to support the elders, and that is also what prompts me to come to the pulpit and give the message what God gives me to whatever it can edify the church. So it is also my responsibility to build the church. And in the denomination, the Levites were doing the Levites, that is the priests and the people in that position, they were doing that duty. But now in the new covenant, we are all priests. That is the thing. We are all priests according to what says in Revelation 5:10 and 1 Peter 2:9. We are all priests in the new covenant church, and so it is our responsibility of all the members of the local church to build the local church. So I thank God for giving me that conviction that I should be also responsible and I should be part of building the local church, and I thank God. And another thing, we just sang that my debt has been paid on the cross. My debt has been paid at the cross. That is a great comfort, and that is a great hope, and that is what gives us hope and comfort and everything. So our Lord Jesus Christ has taken our debt on the cross. And when I was in the denomination again, I never knew about that. I never had that knowledge that Jesus Christ has paid the price for all my sins. I have to go to a sacramental confession, and I have to do many things to pay for my sin. That was my concept and my understanding. But now God has given me this revelation that Jesus Christ has taken all my sins on the cross, and I can be delivered of that that guilt feeling. So now I am free in the Lord Jesus Christ, that all my sins are forgiven, and just I need to believe that. I need to believe that Jesus Christ has taken all my sins on the cross, and that delivers me from all my bondages. So this is a great comfort and consolation for my life, and that's all. May God bless us all.
Okay. I have been reading the book of Job recently, and there are so many things I can relate to from that book. I think most of us would have read that book and the story of Job. One thing that gives so much of assurance, so much of peace, is that God is in control of every event of our lives. God is still on the throne in heaven. And nothing has changed. The circumstances that we may face, God is still watching over us, and He's in absolute control. He's sovereign God. It's not the devil that is ruling the world, but it is my Lord, my Father. And also in the past, I used to think, when I was just became Christian, whenever I see people who are prospering, I mean, worldly, materially, and in terms of wealth and good health and all, I thought God must be really happy with them. And people who are going through a lot of suffering, I used to think that there must be something wrong with them, or God is punishing them for their sins. That was my immature thinking. And just like Job's friends, right? Job's friends came and then they said, "Yeah, you must have done terrible sin. You must have done this. This is all because of your sin. God is so good. You're suffering." And and they, I mean, the reasoning that you see the dialogue between them, and we see that Job is already suffering because of all the things that he lost, his children, his wealth, and his health. And at that time, people coming and condemning him, not knowing that there are a lot of things that are happening in the spiritual realm, about which we don't have any idea. So I must reserve my judgment. I cannot judge anything quickly. So I think I'm tempted to think like that, but I think I should not do that, because we don't know what is the reason why a person is suffering. Definitely, yeah, most of the suffering may be because of some. All suffering, of course, in the world that we see is because of sin, but some particular things, maybe it's just because God is trying to sanctify that person, or strengthen that person, or purify his faith. So there's always not, all sufferings is not because of sin always, and it could be for our own sanctification and purification process that we should understand. And we also see that the persecuted church right now. So we may be worried, we may be concerned, but it's not like the church is going through persecution because God is out of control. But God has allowed them to go through that there'd be a good testimony for God Himself. And devil may try to inflict a lot of things in our lives, but he has to get permission from God. And devil does not even know our future, what we are going to do. So he has a lot of limitations. He cannot be in the same place at all times. No, he cannot be at all places at the same time. So he has a lot of limitations, and he has to report to God. He has to get permission from God to do anything to us. So what a wonderful blessing to know that our enemy has so many limitations. And also we see that we were singing that song also, I am the clay and He's the potter. So sometimes we ask God to change us into Christ's nature, right? We pray that prayer many times. But one preacher was saying that it's a very dangerous prayer to pray for the devil, because he doesn't want us to become Christ-like. And the only process, I think that's a difficult process, but God has to take us through all these things in order to develop that character in us. It cannot just happen without that process. So that sanctification process, when the clay is being crushed and made, and until the potter sees his image on the clay, there is a lot of painful process for which we need to humble ourselves and just yield to Him. And He knows that how much we can bear. And we all have seen this verse, 1 Corinthians 10:13, many times, that He will never allow us to be tempted or tried beyond our ability, but in all these things He will provide us a way to escape. So the book of Job has been such a blessing. I have not completed that yet. I'm reading that, because if I read in King James Version, I could not get much, but I try to read in the Living Translation. It's so good to see the conversations and all that. Finally, God speech from God after all these things is so blessing. It's like, I don't understand many things that is happening. So God is ultimately the wisest one. He knows everything that is happening in this world. He's in control. So I need to humble myself more. And God is all wise, omniscient, omnipotent God. Nothing is impossible for Him. So may God bless these words.